learned a lot about climate change, climate impacts, ice albedo feedbacks, past climate changes, and so on. Now you're asking, just tell us whether our future will be okay. Is it going to be okay? This section of this chapter says it's all going to be okay. It'll all be okay. Who is saying that then? Well, it's the I am trying to bring up the laser pointer, but the slide keeps moving. Okay. Who is saying that it will all be okay? Well, you can say it if you know all the solutions that are coming along, and that's what the inventors of the world say, saying it'll be all okay. They think that modern technology can solve global warming, or at least reduce it and slow down the warming and make it safer. So, what kind of ideas have they come up with? They have these engineering technological solutions to, slow down climate change or take out CO2 from the atmosphere and hide it somewhere and so on. These are called geoengineering projects. What is geoengineering? We are doing something to change the weather and climate, and overall they're called geoengineering, just like you have civil engineering that are doing buildings, computer engineers who are building computers, and so on and so forth. Let's start discussing some of these ideas, and you have to make sure you understand whether these are really safe or not, because when you do experiments somewhere that changes climate or weather, you will affect everybody. If somebody has a negative effect because of what you did, then they will not be happy, right? So let's start with the easiest idea that you learned about. You said surfaces that are bright white reflect more of the sunlight. We called it high albedo. We said ice albedo feedback is important, but can we create albedo feedback elsewhere? So now you take the planet, take a big old brush and get a big ocean of white paint and start painting everything white. Let's reflect the sunlight so that it's less warm on Earth. We'll paint the roads and the roofs white. We'll cover the deserts in white sheets. We'll put a blanket on glaciers to protect them. From melting, we'll shoot a mega mirror into space, and it will work as a parasol, like an umbrella on Earth. No, maybe 55,000 sails to reflect sunlight like this you can see here, or a swarm of billions of thin disks that will combine together to stop the sunlight from even entering the Earth's atmosphere by reflecting it right from space back to space. Or how about this? Send hundreds of unmanned ships into the ocean like this that are just floating around and constantly evaporating seawater. What for? Well, seawater evaporation will cool it, but all that water vapor will form clouds which will get thicker and thicker with so much water vapor being supplied, and they will reflect more sunlight and they will make it cooler. No! We'll spray dust particles into the atmosphere to stop sunlight and diffuse it and make sure it doesn't reach the surface. And in fact, that's what exactly happens. That's exactly what happens when major volcanic explosions occur around the world, and the Earth has cooled in the past with big volcanic eruptions. You can read about the year without summer and so on, and you can look at a famous painting called The Scream by Edvard Munch, who showed colorful skies that shocked a little kid, and that was also related to how the dusts make the sunshine very different. Okay, but there can be unintended consequences, as we'll see in a minute. Or maybe we can capture the CO2 that's coming out of the factories' chimneys and fill it into a drum and put it away. But let's get the CO2 out of the air by doing this. We'll plant forests with lots of trees. Or another even more ingenious idea, we'll scatter iron in the ocean. Not all bicycles or shopping carts, but iron in the form of manure, like an iron fertilizer. Remember, on land we put ammonium fertilizer and so on to make the crops grow more, grow faster. Putting iron fertilizer in the ocean tends to make the plankton grow nicely, and the plankton will use CO2 for photosynthesis. Phytoplankton does that just like trees on land. No, wait, we'll sprinkle ground olivine, ground up olivine wherever we can. What is olivine? It's a kind of rock. What will that do? Olivine is kind of a stone that absorbs CO2 as it wears down. But grinding it takes a lot of energy. What is the meaning of wearing down olivine? We said CO2 dissolves in water and makes carbonic acid, and when that acid falls as rain, it falls on all the rocks, and the rocks keep wearing down. It's called weathering, and that takes up CO2, and that flows into the rivers and into the ocean and stays at the bottom of the ocean. Sometimes it gets released back. There are details, but don't worry about it. Weathering with ground up olivine being thrown around on land can accelerate the weathering and the uptake of CO2 or absorption of CO2 by the weathering process. Fantastic, right? All this screaming makes me thirsty, children. Okay, so what else is going on? Do you know what? We'll collect CO2 from the factories and power stations and put it in the ground like we talked about here. In natural gas fields that were used for mining the gas and oil and so on, that have been pumped empty, for example. Or we'll store CO2 in asphalt. We've asphalted everything. As long as the roads are there, the CO2 won't go anywhere. Remember, CO2 stays in the atmosphere for a long time, so when we put it away, we also have to make sure it stays away for a long time. Some of these ideas might sound crazy, but they have all been through serious academic research. CO2 storage is already happening in some places, and other ideas could become reality too one day, even though there are a lot of snacks. There is always a catch, right? Most of the ideas would be pretty expensive to implement. It's not always easy to predict what the consequences will be either, like dust can produce droughts. A year without summer means a year without agriculture. And what if in the future the money suddenly runs out and we can no longer reflect sunlight with those discs that we talked about here? That takes a lot of money. Then it's not always easy to predict what happens, but if we stop reflecting the sunlight, then it'll instantly be a few degrees warmer, because suddenly we'll get more sunlight, especially if we have not been reducing the CO2 emissions as well, because CO2 is still trapping thermal energy. We're just getting less solar energy, so we are not warming as fast. But if sunlight suddenly bounces back up because the mirrors died away, then the warming is going to accelerate very, very quickly. This is perhaps the biggest objection. If we combat global warming using these kinds of tricks we called geoengineering, then there is less need to tackle climate change properly. People might just say, we are not having global warming anymore, so we can continue to emit CO2. But there is already plenty of invention going on. There are already plenty of inventions that might be able to help. What about the Hyperloop? This is a transportation system in which capsules are shot through the tubes at high speed. If it proves possible to make the system, planes will no longer be necessary. On some routes you can go from Northern California to Southern California much faster than a plane, or you can go from Mumbai to Delhi much faster than a plane, and you build a Hyperloop and you just fly people, shoot people through them. They work with some fancy ideas that use magnetic fields and so on, and they have been tried by our friend Elon Musk of Tesla. So this would make a nice difference to CO2 emissions if we stopped flying. Or You have these sorts of ideas. What about cultured meat? There is a hot dog or some sausage being made in the lab. Scientists in various laboratories are working really hard on this idea. If they manage to grow meat that tastes just as good as real meat, we will soon need fewer cows and other animals, and much less methane will go up into the air. And again, unintended consequences could mean this is processed food which can be bad for you, but hopefully there will be ways to make sure that it's actually healthy as well. What about thorium reactor? That's a nuclear power station that doesn't use uranium, but you guessed it, it uses thorium. Thorium gives it nearly all the advantages a nuclear power station needs, but far fewer disadvantages compared to uranium. Thorium-based power stations would be much safer and produce less radioactive waste, which it would also the waste would remain dangerous for a much shorter period of time. So the waste is less from thorium and it doesn't last as long as the uranium wastes. Another idea, what about nuclear fusion? If only that would work. Remember we talked about sun having all this uncontrolled nuclear fusion of H2 crashing into each other and producing helium and releasing massive amounts of energy. Scientists have been trying for decades to generate energy in the same way as the sun by fusing atomic nuclei together. We called nuclear fusion. If this works, we'll have an almost inexhaustible source of energy just like the sun, and it will not release any CO2 or even any radioactivity. That's why a number of countries are investing millions of dollars in researching nuclear fusion. Artificial sun almost worked in China and it's been tried in many countries now. They already know that they won't succeed anytime soon, but still they keep on going. So you can imagine how high their hopes for nuclear fusion are, and governments keep investing in them. So there is a eureka moment going to jump out very soon with good innovation from a brilliant mind like yourself. That'll just be a game changer. It'll change things so fast. You are young and you haven't seen many changes, but somebody old like me has many things change very fast, like landline we talked about, to portable phones, to smartphones, to social media, to rockets and space travel and artificial intelligence and robots and so on and so forth. Okay, so we'll come back and talk about what else we can do, and it's called the plane will fly anyway. So this is obviously about people who say I can fly because even if I don't fly, the plane will fly anyway. So what is wrong if I jump on a plane that's flying anyway? We'll come back and discuss those things. Okay, so I hope you get some sense that lots of brilliant minds are working on solutions for climate change. They all have a little bit of a snag or a catch because they are still not safe for sure. And when you want to take out CO2, you have to take out all the CO2 you have been accumulating for a couple of 100 years, and the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is very tiny. So it's like finding the needle in a haystack, except the haystack is as big as the planet. Okay, so that's not easy, but brilliant minds keep working on it, and maybe you will join the brilliant minds and do some magic miracle innovation that's going to change everything and make everything better and safe. Okay, so let's come back and talk a little bit more about this section, and then we'll have some fun words to remember. Okay, come back.